One careless moment, one reckless choice. That's all it took for people to meet some of the dumbest and most shocking ends imaginable. These stories aren't just bizarre, they'll make you rethink every split-second decision you make. It was August 12, 2015, when Tyler Brooks decided to turn his annual Phoenix pool party into a deadly spectacle that would haunt everyone present. The 26-year-old insurance salesman had been building his reputation as the neighborhood daredevil, each summer pushing the boundaries further to earn gasps and cheers from his guests. What started as simple diving tricks had evolved into increasingly reckless stunts that made even his closest friends uncomfortable. By noon that scorching Arizona day, Tyler was already several drinks deep, his judgment clouded by alcohol and an insatiable need for attention. The two-story house provided the perfect launching pad for what he called his ultimate cannonball, a stunt he'd been planning all summer. His girlfriend watched nervously as Tyler made his third trip to the roof's edge, each attempt drawing more concerned voices from below. Friends had already begun leaving, their fun overshadowed by growing anxiety about Tyler's deteriorating condition and dangerous fixation. The warnings fell on deaf ears. Tyler's alcohol-soaked brain could only process the imagined glory of his signature move. He grabbed a colorful beach ball, convinced it would add flair to his performance, and climbed onto the roof one final time. Standing 24 feet above the concrete deck, Tyler positioned himself with the confidence of someone whose perception had been completely distorted. The shallow end of the pool stretched below, but his intoxicated mind miscalculated both distance and trajectory. With a triumphant yell, Tyler launched himself into the air, attempting multiple flips while clutching the beach ball. The physics were unforgiving. His excessive force and poor positioning sent him sailing past the pool's edge, reality crashing down as he realized mid-flight that water wouldn't break his fall. The concrete pool deck met Tyler's skull with devastating finality. The sickening crack echoed across the suddenly silent party as his head split open on impact. His neck snapped at the second cervical vertebra, severing his spinal cord instantly. The beach ball bounced mockingly into the pool while Tyler's broken body lay motionless, blood spreading across the sun-baked concrete. The massive head trauma caused immediate brain death, while the spinal severance ensured respiratory failure within seconds. Party guests stood frozen in horror, the festive atmosphere replaced by screams and chaos. Several people would require extensive counseling to process what they'd witnessed, a friend's life ending in an instant due to alcohol-fueled recklessness. Emergency responders arrived to find a scene that would stick with them throughout their careers. Tyler's death was instantaneous, the combination of traumatic brain injury and spinal cord damage leaving no possibility of survival. The aftermath rippled through the Phoenix community and beyond. Insurance companies began implementing stricter policies regarding pool parties and alcohol consumption at private residences. Tyler's death became a cautionary tale used in safety presentations across Arizona. His girlfriend, who had threatened to leave if he attempted the stunt, was left to grapple with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that her final words to Tyler had been spoken in anger. The friends who stayed to witness the tragedy struggled with questions about whether they could have done more to prevent it. The pool that had been the centerpiece of so many happy gatherings became a constant reminder of how quickly celebration can turn to catastrophe. Tyler's parents eventually sold the house, unable to bear the sight of where their son's need for attention had cost him everything. What began as another summer party in suburban Phoenix ended with a young man's life cut short by a toxic combination of alcohol, ego, and poor judgment. Tyler Brooks had finally achieved the attention he craved, but at the ultimate price, becoming a permanent reminder that some stunts aren't worth the applause. It was July 8, 2019 in the city of Erzurum, Turkey. The streets buzzed with the usual summer life, cars honking, kids running in the shade, and people trying to stay cool under umbrellas and awnings. But far from the crowds, inside a quiet home, 24-year-old Zafer Kuzu was about to do something dangerous, something that would shock his community and end his life. Zafer had been in trouble. He'd gotten into a serious fight that left someone injured. Instead of going to prison, a judge gave him a second chance, community service. It wasn't fun, but it wasn't jail either. All he had to do was help out the city for a while, maybe clean streets, paint walls, or assist at local buildings. But Zafer didn't want to do any of that. He felt like it was too embarrassing, too tiring. He wanted out. Then an idea popped into his head. A bad idea. What if he could fake an accident? What if he could get hurt, just enough to be sent to the hospital? and skipped the punishment completely. To Zafir, this seemed clever, but what came next would be anything but smart. He called up two of his friends, Arda, who was just 18, and Mello, a little older. These were kids who trusted Zafir, who probably didn't realize how serious things were about to get. Zafir told them his plan. He wanted to get shot, not with a toy, with a real shotgun. Arda and Mello were shocked. "You're kidding, right?" they probably asked. But Zafir was serious. He believed that if he could survive the blast, it would land him in the hospital, and he'd get out of community service. To protect himself, he strapped two big, puffy pillows to his back. They were regular household pillows, the kind you sleep on at night. He thought they'd cushion the blow. It wasn't armor. It wasn't tested. But Zafir had already made up his mind. They set it up in a quiet room, maybe in someone's home or backyard. No ambulance waiting, no doctor on call. Just three young men about to do something horribly wrong. Zafir stood with his back turned. He told Arda to aim carefully. Arda gripped the shotgun with shaky hands. His heart was probably racing. He took a breath, then pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The blast shook the room. Shotguns don't fire one single bullet. They fire dozens of tiny metal balls called pellets. And at close range, those pellets hit with full force, spreading out fast and wide. Zafir's pillows. They didn't stand a chance. The blast tore through the fabric, through the feathers, and straight into Zafir's back. He screamed, collapsed. Blood soaked through his clothes. Panic filled the room. Arda dropped the shotgun, shaking. Mello ran over to Zafir, yelling his name. But Zafir couldn't speak. He was in shock, struggling to breathe, losing blood fast. They didn't call an ambulance right away. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't want to get in trouble. But every second mattered, and time was running out. By the time help was finally called, it was too late. Zafir had already died. When emergency services arrived, the scene was chaotic. Zafir's lifeless body was on the ground. The shotgun was seized. Police arrested Arda on the spot. Mello was taken in for questioning. Zafir's body was sent to a forensic lab in Istanbul for a full autopsy. His wounds told the full story. Close-range blast, no protection, and zero chance of survival. News spread quickly. A young man had lost his life in the most senseless way, trying to get out of community service. People were shocked, confused, and heartbroken. How could someone believe this was a good idea? Authorities later confirmed that the plan had no chance of working. The court never would have excused someone for a self-inflicted injury. Zafir's entire plan had been built on a lie, and it cost him everything. Now, instead of completing a simple punishment, Zafir was gone. Arda faced legal consequences for pulling the trigger. Mello's life was also changed forever. 3 lives, 1 reckless decision. But the story of Zafir Kuzu isn't the only case where a split-second decision turned into a life-altering tragedy. It was April 2014 in St. Petersburg, Russia. The night air was crisp and cold, the kind that makes your breath visible in small clouds. Most people were tucked away in their homes, but 17-year-old Zhenya Ignatieva saw the darkness as an opportunity. An amateur photographer with dreams bigger than her experience, Zhenya had recently purchased a new camera with money from her summer job. Tonight, she was hunting for the perfect shot, one that would capture not just an image, but the thrill of danger itself. The railway bridge in the Krasnogvardaysky district stood like a steel giant against the night sky. Rising 30 feet above the concrete below, it was exactly the kind of dramatic setting Zhenya was looking for. She imagined the train tracks fading into darkness, creating a striking image that would impress her friends and followers. What she didn't realize was that this search for the perfect photo would cost her everything. Zhenya wasn't alone that night. Her friend Oksana Zhanova, also 17, had come along, though she didn't share Zhenya's passion for risky photography. While Zhenya began climbing the towering structure, Oksana stayed firmly on the ground, watching with a mixture of admiration and concern as her friend ascended higher and higher. She was always looking for the most dramatic shots, Zhenya's grandmother Olga would later tell reporters, her voice breaking with grief. She thought the bridge would make the perfect backdrop. This wasn't Zhenya's first dangerous climb. Like many thrill-seekers her age, she was part of a growing trend where young people scaled tall structures, rooftops, cranes, bridges, to capture breathtaking photos. The danger didn't scare her, it only made the experience more exciting, the resulting images more impressive. When Xenia reached the top of the bridge, she carefully positioned herself, trying to capture the perfect angle. The city lights twinkled in the distance as she balanced precariously on the metal structure. But as she moved to take the selfie, something went terribly wrong. Whether it was a sudden gust of wind, a misstep, or simply the perilous position she was in, Xenia lost her balance. In that heart-stopping moment, she realized she was falling. Instinctively, she reached out to grab something, anything, to stop her descent. Her hand caught a cable, but what should have been her salvation became her doom. The cable was live, carrying 1,500 volts of electricity through its metal core. The shock was immediate and devastating. The electricity surged through Xenia's body, causing her muscles to seize and her grip to loosen. She fell 30 feet to the concrete below, the impact fatal. But the electric shock may have already caused severe damage before she even hit the ground. Oksana, still at the bottom of the bridge, witnessed the entire horrific incident. She watched helplessly as her friend fell, then ran to Xenia's side, but it was too late. When emergency services arrived, alerted by a call about kids on the bridge, they found Oksana frozen in grief beside her friend's body. The police investigation revealed the tragic sequence of events. Xenia had died pursuing what psychologist Martin Voigt would later describe as the perfect shot, a phenomenon increasingly common in the age of social media, where young people take greater and greater risks to capture attention-grabbing images. She died doing what she loved, her grandmother said, finding little comfort in the thought. But she was so young, she had her whole life ahead of her. Xenia's death made headlines across Russia and beyond, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of extreme photography. Her story serves as a grim reminder of how quickly a moment of adventure can turn deadly, how the pursuit of the perfect selfie can lead to the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, Xenia Ignatieva's passion for photography, once a source of joy and creativity, led to her tragic and untimely death, another victim of the deadly selfie game. It was August 2014. A chef named Peng Fon, who worked in Guangdong province in China, tragically died in an unusual way. Peng was preparing a dish that included the meat of an Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, a snake known for its deadly venom. This dish is considered a delicacy in some parts of Asia. That day, Peng had already severed the snake's head and was busy preparing the rest of its body to cook a soup. The snake's head was set aside as Peng focused on his work. About 20 minutes later, Peng went to throw the snake's head into the trash, thinking it was no longer dangerous, but to his shock, the severed head suddenly bit his hand, injecting him with venom. The venom of the Indo-Chinese spitting cobra is extremely powerful. It contains neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and eventually stopping the victim from breathing. In Peng's case, the venom started affecting him almost immediately. He had no time to react or get help before his respiratory system began to shut down. The diners in the restaurant were enjoying their meals, unaware of what was happening in the kitchen, but then they heard loud screams and a lot of noise coming from the back. Restaurant guest Lin Sun, who was there celebrating his wife's birthday, later described the chaos. "We were eating when suddenly there was a lot of noise. We didn't know what was going on but could hear people screaming from the kitchen." Realizing something was terribly wrong, the restaurant staff called for a doctor. Unfortunately, by the time medical help arrived, it was too late. Peng Fon had already died from the venom. The speed at which the venom worked left little time for anyone to save him, and without anti-venom, there was nothing that could be done. A police spokesman described the event as a highly unusual case, explaining that once the venom took hold, there was no chance of saving Peng's life. Only the anti-venom could have helped, but it wasn't given in time. It was just a tragic accident. Experts later explained how this could happen. Yang Hongchang, a snake expert with 40 years of experience, said that reptiles, including snakes, can still move for a short time after their body parts are removed, or even after they are decapitated. When a snake's head is cut off, it's technically dead because its basic body functions stop, but reflexes can still happen, he said. This means that even after being killed, the snake's head can still bite and inject venom, which is exactly what happened to Peng. The Indo-Chinese spitting cobra, the type of snake Peng was handling, is especially dangerous because of its venomous bite and its ability to spit venom with great accuracy. This snake's venom can cause severe damage and even death, as seen in Peng's case. Despite being decapitated, the snake's reflexes allowed it to bite and kill Peng. Pung, showing just how dangerous these creatures can be even after death. In some parts of Asia, snake meat is believed to have health benefits, and it is often used in traditional medicine. In Guangdong province, where Pung worked, snake meat has been eaten for centuries and is considered a delicacy. It is believed to cure various ailments and strengthen the body. This belief, however, doesn't eliminate the very real dangers involved in preparing and consuming such dangerous animals. The restaurant where Pung worked was left in shock after his death. The diners who were there that day will likely never forget the tragedy that unfolded in the kitchen. What began as an ordinary meal ended with the sudden loss of a life. It was a quiet Saturday evening on December 6, 2009. In the small town of Konotop, Ukraine, Vladimir Likonos, a 25-year-old chemistry student, sat at his computer in his home while his parents were nearby, enjoying a peaceful evening. From a young age, Vladimir had been fascinated by science, particularly math, physics, and chemistry. His passion led him to study at a regional branch of the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, one of Ukraine's most prestigious technical universities. Vladimir had a peculiar habit. He liked to chew gum with a twist. He would regularly dip his gum in citric acid to enhance and prolong its flavor. It was something he did so often that it had become second nature to him. His friends and classmates knew him as a quiet, level-headed young man who spent most of his free time experimenting with various chemicals and even making homemade firecrackers. That fateful night, as Vladimir sat at his computer, he reached for what he thought was his usual citric acid to dip his gum into. However, on his table were two containers, one with citric acid and another containing an explosive powder he had been working with for his studies. In the dim light, or perhaps out of habit, Vladimir made a devastating mistake. He dipped his gum into the wrong container. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the evening silence. The sound was so loud it echoed throughout the house. Vladimir's mother, hearing the blast, rushed to her son's room. What she found was a scene of horror. Vladimir lying on the floor, his face bloodied and disfigured. The explosion had blown off his entire jaw and most of the lower part of his face. When police arrived, they found approximately 3.5 ounces, 100 grams, of the explosive powder on Vladimir's work table. The substance looked remarkably similar to citric acid, but was actually an unidentified explosive compound. The scene was so disturbing that even seasoned police officers were shaken. Police spokeswoman Elvira Biganova later stated that it was an accident anyone could have made. A bomb squad was called to the scene, but the powder was deemed too volatile to move and had to be neutralized on site. Emergency services tried desperately to save Vladimir, but his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation revealed that the explosive powder was approximately 4 times more powerful than TNT. Vladimir had unknowingly created a bomb in his own mouth. Local experts would later confirm that the substance he had mistakenly used was indeed a highly volatile explosive, far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Vladimir's death sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Konotop. His friends remembered him as a brilliant student who was deeply passionate about his studies. He had just finished his semester exams and was home for the holidays. Irina Lisovskaya, deputy dean of the chemical engineering faculty, responded to the report saying, "He got an A in chemistry, but his grades in other subjects were average." Yes, Vladimir was not a poor student, but they don't teach how to make bombs at KPI. Vladimir Likonos' death serves as a stark reminder of how even the most mundane habits can turn deadly when combined with dangerous substances. His story, while shocking, highlights the importance of proper chemical safety and the devastating consequences that can occur from a single moment of confusion. Today, he rests in the Alexandrova Cemetery in Sumy, Ukraine, his grave marked by a single photograph, a reminder of a young man whose promising life was cut tragically short by one fatal mistake. It was May 5, 2020, when 22-year-old Ruben "Rubes" Taylor made his final attempt at internet fame in an abandoned cement factory in Detroit, Michigan. Rubes and his crew had built a modest following, creating extreme dare videos, each stunt more outrageous than the last. Their channel specialized in dangerous challenges that pushed the boundaries of common sense, attracting viewers who craved increasingly reckless content. Their latest brainstorm seemed simple enough: fill an old bathtub with wet cement and challenge each other to bathe like living statues. The abandoned factory provided the perfect backdrop of industrial decay they craved for their aesthetic, with crumbling walls and rusted machinery, creating an apocalyptic atmosphere. What they lacked was any semblance of planning or safety consideration. No exit strategy, no safety measures, no understanding of how quickly cement sets once mixed with water. Rubes volunteered to go first, boasting about being invincible and mildly cement-proof, whatever that meant. His friends had tried talking him out of more dangerous stunts before, but Rubes always insisted he knew what he was doing and that danger was just part of the game. The group discovered an old industrial cement mixer on site, a massive rusted beast that had been abandoned for years. They rigged it with a makeshift lever system using metal pipes and rope to pour directly into the bathtub they'd dragged inside from a nearby demolition site. The setup looked precarious, but they were more concerned with camera angles than structural integrity. As Rubes stepped into the tub wearing only swim shorts and lowered himself down, his friends positioned multiple cameras around the scene and shouted encouragement about statue mode being activated. The anticipation was electric as they prepared to capture what they believed would be their most viral moment yet. The first friend pulled the lever, but the rusted mechanism jammed halfway. When another grabbed a metal pipe to force it loose, applying significant pressure, the chute suddenly swung completely open. Nearly 300 pounds of wet cement surged into the tub instantly, engulfing Rubes up to his shoulders in mere seconds. Before anyone could process what happened, cement continued flowing and spilled over his face, sealing around his mouth and nose as it began its rapid curing process. The mixture was thicker than expected, immediately restricting his breathing. Rubes struggled briefly, but couldn't inhale or signal clearly through the thickening mixture that muffled his desperate attempts at communication. Panic set in as his friends tried scooping cement away with bare hands, their fingers scraping uselessly against the hardening surface. The cement was setting faster than anyone anticipated. By the time someone found a hammer and began chipping frantically at the edges, Rubes had already suffocated beneath the concrete tomb of his own making. Emergency responders arrived too late despite frantic calls. The bathtub required industrial jackhammering equipment to retrieve his body, the cement having cured completely around him, like a grotesque sculpture. What started as another wild stunt for social media views ended with a young man's life cut short by a combination of poor planning, mechanical failure, and the unforgiving nature of industrial materials. The abandoned factory that provided their perfect aesthetic backdrop became the scene of a tragedy that no amount of likes or shares could undo. Rubes' final video was never uploaded, but the story spread anyway as a cautionary tale about the deadly pursuit of viral fame. His friends were left traumatized, forever haunted by the sound of cement hardening and their inability to save him from his own reckless ambition. It was January 27, 2018, at Nair Hospital in Mumbai, India. Rajesh Maru, a 32-year-old man from Lalbagh, had recently started a new job at a clothing shop in Parel. Today he wasn't at work, but was instead visiting the hospital to help his brother-in-law's mother, Laxmi Solanki, who needed an urgent MRI scan for suspected meningitis and pneumonia. What should have been a routine hospital visit would end in one of the most bizarre and preventable deaths you'll ever hear about. Rajesh was wheeling Laxmi on a stretcher with his brother-in-law Harish when they reached the MRI section. Anyone who's ever had an MRI knows the strict rules. No metal objects allowed. These machines use powerful magnets, thousands of times stronger than your refrigerator magnet, that can turn even small metal items into deadly projectiles. That's why there are multiple warning signs, metal detectors, and screening procedures. But here's where things went catastrophically wrong. As they approached the MRI room, ward boy Vithal Chavan asked Rajesh to carry an oxygen cylinder inside. Yes, you heard that right. A metal oxygen cylinder into a room with one of the most powerful magnets on Earth. When Rajesh hesitated, Chavan reassured him that this was routine work and claimed the machine was switched off. It was a fatal lie. The moment Rajesh stepped into the room with the cylinder, the MRI machine's powerful magnet activated like a giant invisible hand, yanking the metal cylinder with incredible force. Rajesh, still holding on to the cylinder, was violently pulled along with it. The force was so strong that his hand became trapped between the cylinder and the machine. Police would later explain how the magnetic waves sucked in the cylinder, dragging Maru along with it due to his proximity to the trolley. In the chaos that followed, the cylinder's flow meter broke, causing liquid oxygen to leak directly onto Rajesh's face. His brother-in-law and the ward boy desperately tried to free him, but the magnetic pull was too powerful. During the struggle, Rajesh's left index finger was severed. By the time they managed to pull him away from the machine, Rajesh had inhaled a fatal amount of liquid oxygen. He was rushed to the trauma center, but it was too late. By the time they reached the emergency ward, he was already dead. What makes this death so mind-bogglingly stupid is that it was entirely preventable. The MRI room had multiple warning signs about magnetic fields, prohibited items, and restricted entry. The ward boy, who should have known better, gave dangerously incorrect information. The doctor on duty failed to supervise properly, and the metal door to the MRI room, which should have been closed, was wide open. Rajesh's relatives later lamented that while the ward boy's permission to carry the oxygen cylinder was the initial mistake, the tragedy could have been prevented if the metal door had been properly secured. In the aftermath, 3 people were arrested: Dr. Saurabh Lanjakar, ward boy Vithal Chavan, and attendant Sunita Survey, all charged with causing death by negligence. The hospital's MRI machine was shut down pending investigation, and the state government announced compensation of 500,000 rupees, or about $7,870 for Rajesh's family. To add insult to injury, Rajesh's severed finger remained stuck in the MRI machine for nearly 18 months before his family could retrieve it for proper funeral rites. Rajesh Maru's death stands as a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when basic safety protocols are ignored. A perfect storm of negligence, misinformation, and physics that led to one of the dumbest and most preventable deaths in medical history. It was October 31st, 2024. Diwali night brought light and laughter to Bengaluru, India. Amidst the celebrations, however, one group of friends witnessed a tragic turn of events, an example of the dangers that could arise from reckless decisions. In the middle of the festivities was 32-year-old Shabarish, a construction worker known for his friendly nature. After a long day at work, he eagerly joined his friends to celebrate. Shabarish, who led a modest life, valued his time with loved ones. That night, encouraged by the energy of the festival and a few drinks, his friends presented him with a daring challenge. They offered him a new auto rickshaw if he would sit on a box of lit fireworks and let them explode beneath him. For Shabarish, who owned very little, this was a tempting offer. At around 9:30 in the evening, Shabarish accepted the dare, likely not fully aware of the risks. CCTV footage captured the event as the fireworks went off beneath him, leading to a powerful explosion that knocked him to the ground. His friends, stunned by what had happened, rushed him to Victoria Hospital, hoping he could recover. However, his injuries were severe, with extensive burns across his lower body. Shabarish fought for his life in the hospital over the next couple of days. His mother, Vijaya, first heard about the incident through one of Shabarish's friends, who vaguely mentioned he'd been hurt while handling fireworks. At the time, she had no idea about the real cause of his injuries as she watched her son suffer. On November 2nd, Shabarish succumbed to his injuries. The severe burns had taken an irreversible toll. As his family made arrangements for his funeral, they finally learned the truth of what had happened. CCTV footage revealed the role his friends played in pushing him toward the dare, and Vijaya was devastated to learn they had misled her initially, making her believe it was an accidental injury. Authorities quickly put together the details of the night. Deputy Commissioner of Police Lokesh Jagalasar reported that 6 friends who had encouraged Shabarish to perform the dangerous stunt were arrested and charged with culpable homicide. The tragic events resulted from a mix of alcohol, poor judgment, and peer pressure. What began as a daring challenge with the promise of an auto rickshaw ended in a tragic loss, deeply impacting Shabarish's family. The incident was captured on a CCTV camera installed at one of the buildings. Vijaya told a local newspaper, "I was shocked to see the footage and realized that the youths had lied to me." According to Vijaya, Shabarish had gone to work as a construction worker and returned home for the Diwali celebration. "I wish he had stayed away for a few more days," lamented the mother. "At least he would have still been alive." Shabarish's story is one among many, as accidents involving fireworks frequently spike during Diwali in India. Although the season brings joy for many, it often leads to unfortunate incidents, sometimes with fatal outcomes. Shabarish's family now faces the painful aftermath of his loss. Vijaya initially trusted the young men who were with her son that night, believing their story about an accidental injury. Now she wishes her son had avoided the Diwali festivities altogether. This tragic dare turned a night of celebration into a heartbreaking event, showing how easily festivities festivities can spiral into disaster when poor decisions are made under the influence of alcohol. For Shabarish, the promise of a new auto rickshaw and the possibility of a better life clouded his judgment, leading him to a fatal choice. It was 2010 in Sydney, Australia. Sam Ballard, a 19-year-old rugby player with a promising future ahead of him, was hanging out at his friend Jimmy Galvin's house. The group of friends were having what they called a red wine appreciation night, trying to act mature as they sipped their drinks on the patio. But one simple dare would transform this ordinary evening into the beginning of a tragic 8-year nightmare. As the friends chatted and drank, a garden slug crawled across the concrete patio. Someone at the gathering posed what seemed like a harmless question. Should I eat it? Before anyone could really think it through, Sam, young and fearless, picked up the slug and swallowed it. The friends laughed it off, and the night continued as normal. None of them could have imagined that this split-second decision would lead to devastating consequences. A few days later, Sam started feeling strange. He complained of severe pain in his legs, followed by bouts of vomiting and dizziness. His mother, Katie Ballard, initially worried that he might have multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected his father. But when Sam mentioned eating the slug, she dismissed it, saying, "No one gets sick from that." She couldn't have been more wrong. The truth was far worse than anyone could have anticipated. The slug Sam had eaten was carrying rat lungworm, a parasitic worm that typically lives in rodents, but can infect slugs and snails when they eat rat droppings. When humans become infected, the parasite can cause a severe form of meningitis called eosinophilic meningoencephalitis. In Sam's case, the infection was catastrophic. The parasites had made their way to Sam's brain and spinal cord, triggering a devastating inflammatory response. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he fell into a coma that would last for 420 days. More than a year of his young life lost to darkness. When he finally woke up, the damage was severe and irreversible. The once athletic rugby player was now a quadriplegic, unable to eat without a feeding tube or move without intense effort. Sam required round-the-clock care 7 days a week. His mother, Katie, watched as her son, who she had always thought of as invincible, struggled with the most basic functions. He couldn't regulate his body temperature, suffered from seizures, and needed help with everything from eating to using the bathroom. The National Disability Insurance Scheme initially supported Sam with a $492,000 care package, but this was later slashed to just $135,000, though public outcry helped restore the funding. Despite the tragedy, Sam's friends never abandoned him. They called themselves Team Ballard and regularly visited, helping him watch rugby matches and occasionally sneaking him a taste of beer when his mother wasn't looking. Jimmy Galvin, the friend who hosted that fateful night, carried the weight of that evening heavily. He later apologized to Sam for not stopping him from eating the slug, and Sam's response was to burst into tears, showing he was still very much present mentally despite his physical limitations. For 8 years, Sam fought against the devastating effects of that one impulsive decision. His mother, Katie, remained by his side, later sharing on Facebook how the incident had devastated, changed his life forever, changed my life forever. The impact is huge. On November 2nd, 2018, at the age of 28, Sam finally succumbed to complications from his condition. His last words to his mother were, "I love you." Sam died at Hornsby Hospital, not far from where he grew up, surrounded by 20 of his closest friends and family members. His friend Jimmy later said the room was full of love during Sam's final moments. The young man who had once been full of life and promise had spent his final 8 years as a cautionary tale about how a seemingly harmless dare can have devastating consequences. Today, Sam Ballard's story serves as a sobering reminder of how a single moment of thoughtless bravado can change everything. While most people who contract the parasite recover without incident, Sam's case shows how devastating the consequences can be when things go wrong. His story continues to be shared as a warning to others that some dares aren't worth taking, no matter how harmless they might seem at the time. It was July 4th, 2022, when Preston Doyle's quest for viral fame turned into a deadly spectacle in Mobile, Alabama. The 21-year-old college dropout had built a reputation around his backyard stunts and minor viral clips. The previous 4th of July, he'd taped 20 sparklers to his jacket and sprinted around a cul-de-sac, earning neighborhood applause and social media likes. Those fleeting moments of attention planted a dangerous seed in his mind. Preston spent months planning what he called the Human Sparkler 2.0. He constructed a full-body jumpsuit by duct-taping over 100 firecrackers and small aerial shells to a cotton hoodie and jeans. No flame-retardant materials were considered. No safety protocols existed. Just raw ambition and a friend armed with a blowtorch to light the ignition fuse. Friends warned him about the risks, but Preston dismissed their concerns. He was convinced this stunt would finally give him the breakthrough he desperately craved. The plan seemed foolproof in his mind. Run down the street as fireworks launched from his body in a spectacular display that would break the internet. At 9:03 p.m., 15 cheering onlookers gathered as Preston prepared for his grand finale. The summer air was thick with anticipation and the smell of barbecue smoke from nearby celebrations. Preston struck a pose, grinning confidently as his friend approached with the blowtorch. The ignition fuse sparked to life. The first few firecrackers popped in sequence as intended, drawing cheers from the crowd. But the aerial shells on his back had other plans. They ignited prematurely and simultaneously, creating a backdraft that instantly engulfed the upper half of his suit in flames. The cotton fabric caught fire immediately, melting and adhering to his skin within seconds. Preston's confident grin vanished as he stumbled and collapsed, his screams piercing the night air. Chaos erupted as other fireworks began launching erratically in all directions, striking parked cars, igniting shrubbery, and sending the crowd scrambling for cover. Friends who tried to help were forced to retreat as firecrackers ricocheted off the pavement, exploding around them in a deadly light show. For nearly 90 seconds, no one could reach Preston through the ongoing barrage of sparks, smoke, and popping blasts. The very spectacle he'd created to entertain had become his prison. By the time someone managed to get close with a garden hose, Preston was no longer moving, his body severely burned beyond recognition. He was airlifted to a burn trauma center, but the damage was too extensive. Preston succumbed to his injuries 48 hours later, his dreams of viral fame extinguished along with his life. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of online attention can lead down increasingly dangerous paths. What started as harmless sparklers escalated into a lethal fireworks suit, proving that sometimes the price of going viral is far too high to pay. It was November 4th, 2012, a day like any other at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. The animals were out, visitors were enjoying the sights, and 2-year-old Maddox Lamar Durkosh was there with his parents, Jason and Elizabeth. They were having a great time, exploring the zoo and soaking in the sights. But little did they know, this trip would end in a way none of them could ever have imagined. Maddox, just a toddler, was full of excitement. His eyes lit up at the sight of the African-painted dogs in their enclosure. The zoo had a special viewing platform for these dogs, raised about 4 feet off the ground. Visitors could look down into the enclosure, getting a great view of the animals. But this platform, designed to offer a closer look, was also risky, especially for small children. Elizabeth, wanting Maddox to see the dogs better, lifted him onto the platform's railing. It seemed like a harmless move. After all, many parents had done the same thing before. They held their kids up to get a better look at the animals. But there were warning signs. Signs that urged caution and reminded people of the dangers. But in the excitement of the moment, Elizabeth didn't think twice. Suddenly, Maddox lost his balance. In an instant, he slipped from her grasp. Time seemed to freeze as he fell. He tumbled 14 feet, missing the safety net below, the one meant to catch small objects, not a child. And just like that, Maddox landed right in the middle of the African-painted dog exhibit. The world seemed to slow down, but the horror was only just beginning. The dogs, startled and confused by the sudden movement, began to react. They circled around him, unsure of what had just fallen into their midst. Within seconds, the situation turned terrifying. The zoo staff responded as fast as they could, rushing to the scene, but they couldn't get to Maddox in time. A police officer, desperate to stop the attack, fired a shot at one of the dogs, trying to scare them away. But it was too late. Maddox had already suffered fatal injuries. The crowd was in shock. The zoo's staff worked quickly to contain the remaining animals, and the African-painted dogs were moved to another facility. The exhibit was immediately closed, but the damage had already been done. For Maddox's family, the nightmare was far from over. Elizabeth faced harsh criticism for lifting Maddox onto the railing, but authorities deemed it a tragic accident. The family believed the zoo had ignored safety concerns, as staff had noted the risks since 2006. While the zoo insisted it met all safety standards, the public was divided. The case was settled out of court. In the aftermath, the zoo removed the dangerous platform and relocated the painted dogs. To honor Maddox, his family started a toy truck donation drive, which became a nationwide success, ensuring his memory lived on and touching many hearts far beyond the zoo. It was September 24, 1980, and Led Zeppelin's powerhouse drummer John Bonham was preparing for the band's upcoming North American tour. At 32 years old, Bonzo was already a legend, known for his thunderous drumming that gave Led Zeppelin its distinctive sound. But on this day, his notorious appetite for alcohol would lead to one of rock music's most tragic and preventable deaths. The morning started with Bonham being picked up by Led Zeppelin's assistant Rex King. During a breakfast stop, Bonham knocked back 4 quadruple vodka screwdrivers. That's 16 shots of vodka before most people have even started their day. For context, health experts recommend no more than 1 shot per hour with water in between, but Bonham wasn't known for moderation. The band was rehearsing at guitarist Jimmy Page's house in Windsor, England. As the day progressed, Bonham continued drinking heavily, consuming vodka straight from the bottle. By the time rehearsals ended that evening, he had reportedly consumed around 40 shots, nearly 1.5 liters of 40% ABV vodka in just 12 hours. Bonham's drinking was no secret. Despite his image as a wild man of rock, those close to him knew he struggled with alcohol dependency. He had recently kicked a heroin habit but had replaced it with even heavier drinking. The pressure of touring had always been difficult for him. He hated flying, suffered from panic attacks before shows, and missed his family terribly when on the road. That morning, while riding to rehearsal with Robert Plant, Bonham had confided, "I've had it with playing drums. Everybody plays better than me." It was a surprising admission from a man widely regarded as one of the greatest drummers in rock history. By the end of rehearsals, Bonham was severely intoxicated. He passed out on a sofa and was carried to a bedroom by an assistant who carefully laid him on his side and propped him up with pillows, a precaution that tragically proved insufficient. The next morning, Led Zeppelin's road manager Benji Lefebvre and bassist John Paul Jones went to check on Bonham. They found him unresponsive and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Despite their efforts to revive him, Bonham was gone. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: pulmonary aspiration. In simple terms, Bonham had vomited in his sleep and choked on it. His body had begun rejecting the massive amount of alcohol, but in his unconscious state, he couldn't turn over or clear his airway. It was a slow, silent death that might have been prevented had someone stayed with him throughout the night. What makes Bonham's death particularly senseless is how avoidable it was. His bandmates were well aware of his drinking problem. Earlier that year, during a European tour, he had shown signs of fatigue and had been taken ill during a show in Nuremberg. The warning signs were there, but the rock and roll lifestyle normalized such excessive behavior. In the aftermath, Led Zeppelin made the decision not to continue without their drummer. On December 4, 1980, they announced their disbandment, stating that they couldn't go on without Bonham. His death effectively ended one of rock's greatest bands at the height of their powers. John Bonham's legacy as a drummer remains unparalleled. His thunderous beats on tracks like When the Levee Breaks and Kashmir continue to influence drummers today. But his death serves as a stark reminder of alcohol's dangers and the rock culture that often glorifies excess. In the end, the man who once told Robert Plant he was the greatest drummer in the world died not from some dramatic rock and roll incident, but from the simple, stupid act of drinking far too much and being left alone to sleep it off. A dumb, tragic end for a legendary musician. It was March 18, 2018, in Tempe, Arizona. The evening was clear as 49-year-old Elaine Hertzberg crossed a 4-lane road with her bicycle. At 9:58 p.m., the unthinkable happened. An Uber test vehicle operating independently in autonomous mode struck Elaine at 39 miles per hour. She died from the impact immediately. Countless and lengthy investigations were carried out to understand what went wrong. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, together with local police, searched for details of of the crash that occurred on that fateful evening. All their findings pointed to human error as the primary cause. Rafaela Vasquez was in the driver's seat and was supposed to watch the vehicle as a human safety driver. However, investigations later revealed that Vasquez was not paying full attention to the road at the time of the accident. Dashcam footage released by the police showed Vasquez looking down for several seconds while the car was traveling at 39 miles per hour. She had been streaming an episode of the television show, The Voice. Despite this, Vasquez pleaded not guilty to any charges related to the accident and was released to await trial. Further complicating the situation, records from the streaming service Hulu indicated that Vasquez's device had been streaming that particular show at the time of the crash. Additionally, the autonomous vehicle itself had shortcomings. Its automatic systems failed to recognize Elaine and her bicycle as a potential threat that could lead to a collision, a critical malfunction in a technology designed to prevent such incidents. Adding to the concerns, just days before the accident, an employee had already raised issues with the vehicle's safety to the company's leaders. The employee expressed worries that the vehicles were frequently involved in accidents and questioned whether the operators, like Vasquez, were adequately trained to handle these advanced systems. These warnings, however, did not lead to any immediate action, and sadly, the fatal crash occurred, raising serious questions about the overall safety and reliability of autonomous vehicles. The police report issued in June 2018 concluded that the fatal collision could have been entirely avoidable if Vasquez had been monitoring the road. This incident sparked discussions about the safety protocols for autonomous vehicles and the crucial role that human operators play in ensuring these technologies do not pose a risk to public safety. After the incident, the state of Arizona took decisive action by suspending Uber's ability to test self-driving cars on its public roads. This move reflected growing concerns about the safety of autonomous vehicles. In response to the suspension and ongoing safety concerns, Uber ended all its autonomous vehicle tests in Arizona. However, Uber later managed to regain permission to conduct these tests in California, starting earlier in 2020, signaling a cautious continuation of their development of this technology. In July 2023, Rafaela Vasquez pleaded guilty to endangerment. This plea was a key moment in history, as it was the first time a crash involving a fully autonomous car resulted in a criminal conviction. Rafaela initially told police that she hadn't seen Elaine before the crash, claiming that Elaine came out of nowhere on a dark street in Tempe. Initially charged with negligent homicide, Rafaela eventually reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. The judge overseeing the case accepted Rafaela's plea and sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation. Elaine Hertzberg's death marked a turning point in the development of autonomous vehicles, forcing companies to reconsider their safety protocols and the public to question the readiness of this technology for our roads. It was January 14, 2013 in Cantonment, Florida. James Campbell, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran, had lived in the area for most of his life. He was well known and well liked, a loyal friend and family man with a simple life. But on this particular day, a series of mundane events would lead to one of the most bizarre deaths ever recorded in Florida's history. James and his wife, 56-year-old Iris Fortner, were returning home in their 1995 Chevrolet van. It was a routine they'd done countless times before: pull up to their driveway, open the metal gates, and park the van. The couple also had a large boxer bulldog, a beloved pet that would unknowingly become an instrument of death. As they approached their home, James stepped out of the passenger side to open the metal gates, allowing the vehicle to enter. Iris remained in the driver's seat, ready to back the van into the driveway once the gates were open. As James walked towards the gates, Iris opened her door to check on his position. That's when everything went horribly wrong. Their dog, curious and excited, saw its opportunity. The large boxer jumped into the front seat, and in a freak accident that nobody could have predicted, landed right on the accelerator pedal. The van, which was in reverse gear, suddenly surged backward. Iris, caught completely off guard, desperately tried to stop the vehicle. She reached for the brake, but it was too late. The van backed into James, trapping him under its wheels. Emergency services were called immediately. Escambia County paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. James Campbell was pronounced dead at the scene. The impact had been severe, and despite Iris's frantic efforts, the accident was unavoidable. The Florida Highway Patrol conducted an investigation into the incident. The sequence of events seemed almost too bizarre to be true. A man killed by his own dog accidentally pressing the accelerator. Yet the evidence was clear. James had exited the van to open the gates, Iris had opened the door to check on his position, and their dog had jumped into the driver's seat, inadvertently pressing the accelerator. Local news outlets covered the story extensively. Neighbors and friends expressed their condolences, sharing their grief and disbelief. Many described James, affectionately known as Bo, as a good friend and a devoted family man. He was a graduate of Tate High School and a veteran who had served his country in Vietnam, only to meet his end in such an unbelievable way. Despite the overwhelming support, there were whispers of suspicion. Some questioned the probability of such an accident, suggesting there might be more to the story. However, the official reports and eyewitness accounts left little room for doubt. It was simply a tragic accident, a series of unfortunate events that led to the loss of a beloved community member. The dog, who had unintentionally caused the accident, remained with Iris. The boxer bulldog wasn't blamed for its actions. It had acted out of excitement and curiosity, with no way of understanding the consequences of its actions. Iris suffered minor injuries but was not charged with any wrongdoing. She was left to cope with the loss of her husband in what must be one of the most bizarre accidents in Florida's history. Today, James Campbell's death serves as a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. In a matter of seconds, a routine activity, a beloved pet, and a simple check on someone's position combine to create a perfect storm of tragedy. It's the kind of death that makes you realize sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't the ones we prepare for. They're the ordinary ones we never see coming. It was November 8, 2019, when Kevin Martinez's obsession with bathroom efficiency turned his Portland apartment into a death trap. The 31-year-old freelance writer had always been different. While his neighbors called maintenance for simple fixes, Kevin preferred elaborate DIY solutions that often created bigger problems. His bathroom had become a testament to this philosophy. A maze of extension cords snaking across wet tiles, power strips balanced precariously on the sink edge, and a tablet suspended from the ceiling by a complex rigging system he'd fashioned from coat hangers and dental floss. For months, Kevin had ignored the steady drip from his bathroom ceiling, despite the obvious electrical hazard it created. His landlord had been trying to schedule repairs, but Kevin refused all maintenance visits, convinced he could solve everything himself. The leak had grown worse, creating a perpetual puddle near his makeshift charging station where he powered multiple devices during his extended bathroom sessions. Kevin had been constipated for 3 days, and his solution was typically overcomplicated. He'd positioned his tablet at the perfect angle for reading, arranged a cup of coffee within arm's reach on the sink, and even installed a small fan to improve air circulation. The bathroom resembled a bizarre command center more than a place for basic human needs. That Friday morning, everything went wrong simultaneously. While adjusting his tablet's position for better lighting, Kevin's elbow caught the coffee cup. The hot liquid cascaded directly onto the power strip below, sending sparks flying across the small space. The electrical surge ignited a roll of toilet paper hanging directly above the outlet. Kevin shot up in panic, but his sudden movement tangled him in the web of cords suspending his tablet. As he struggled to free himself, the burning toilet paper dropped onto his synthetic bathrobe. The cheap material caught fire instantly, flames racing up the fabric toward his chest and arms. Desperate to reach the shower, Kevin lunged forward but caught his foot in a loop of extension cord. He crashed headfirst into the toilet bowl with a sickening crack. The impact knocked him unconscious immediately, leaving him helpless as flames consumed his upper body. The fire spread quickly through the cord-filled bathroom. By the time firefighters arrived, Kevin was beyond saving. The first responders stood bewildered at the scene, trying to piece together how someone could create such a dangerous setup in such a small space. The investigation revealed Kevin's elaborate bathroom contraption in all its deadly detail. His landlord faced immediate lawsuits when other tenants discovered similar electrical violations throughout the building, a pattern of deferred maintenance that had created hazardous conditions in multiple units. Neighbors later revealed Kevin's history of bizarre modifications throughout his apartment. He'd rigged his kitchen faucet with a pulley system and installed motion sensors in his bedroom closet. His need to overcomplicate simple tasks had become legendary in the building. Kevin Martinez died because he couldn't accept that sometimes the simplest solution is asking for help. His determination to solve every problem himself transformed a basic bathroom into a fire hazard that claimed his life in the most preventable way imaginable. It was January 7, 2014 in Xinjiang City, China. a bustling town where traditional life met the modern world, when a seemingly trivial event quickly turned into a nightmare. Li Meilan, a 32-year-old woman, was visiting her husband's family for a quiet day. She had just used an open-pit toilet, a common sight in rural parts of China, where a simple structure with a hole in the ground was used for waste disposal. As she rose from the toilet, her brand new phone, a shiny, expensive device worth 2,000 yuan, roughly $320, slipped from her hand and fell straight into the deep pit below, disappearing into the muck. Now, for most people, this would have been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It was just a phone after all. But for Meilan, it was a catastrophe. The phone wasn't just an expensive item. It was a symbol of her hard work and her connection to the world beyond the village. There was no way she could let it go. Without a second thought, she called her husband for help, her voice filled with urgency and desperation. Her husband, knowing how much this phone meant to her, didn't hesitate. He rushed over, thinking that retrieving the phone would be an easy task. But as he jumped into the pit, something went terribly wrong. The pit, a deep, dark hole filled with the remnants of human waste, also held something far more dangerous: toxic fumes. A mixture of gases, invisible but deadly, filled the air. As soon as he landed, the fumes overwhelmed him, and he collapsed, losing consciousness almost immediately. His body, vulnerable and unprepared, succumbed to the toxic air. Li Meilan, helpless and panicked, could only stand there for a brief moment, staring in horror at her husband. But what she didn't know was that the fumes, while invisible to the naked eye, were lethal. The toxic air, which had caused her husband to collapse, would soon claim others. Her mother-in-law, seeing her son fall into unconsciousness, screamed and rushed to his aid, but the pit offered no mercy. She too jumped in, desperate to save him. Just like her son, she was overcome by the gases and fell unconscious, crumpling to the ground beside him. Meilan, standing on the edge of the pit, could only watch as the situation spiraled out of control. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What could she do? Who could she call for help? But time was running out. The more she thought, the more she realized that if she didn't act, it would be too late. Driven by love and fear, she made the decision to climb into the pit. The moment her feet touched the ground, the thick, suffocating fumes hit her hard. She didn't have time to scream, didn't have time to call out for help. The gases filled her lungs, and in mere seconds, she too collapsed, unconscious and vulnerable. Now the entire family was trapped. The father-in-law, standing helplessly by the side, could only watch in horror. His family members, once full of life, were now lying unconscious in the filthy pit. He could feel his heart racing as he tried to figure out a way to save them. But what could he do? How could he rescue them from the pit of death? In a final, desperate act of love and fear, he jumped in as well. But just like the others, he was overpowered by the toxic gases and fell unconscious, adding to the growing list of victims in the pit. Time seemed to slow down. As the toxic fumes swirled around the pit, everyone who had jumped in was now lying unconscious in the muck. But outside, the neighbors were beginning to hear the commotion. The sound of people yelling, shouting for help must have reached their ears. Quickly they gathered together, not knowing the full scope of the danger, but understanding that something was very wrong. Without wasting a moment, they ran to the pit, determined to help. But even as they tried to rescue the family, they weren't safe. The toxic air had no mercy, and it soon began to affect the rescuers. One neighbor, despite his best efforts, collapsed, fainting from the overwhelming fumes. Panic set in as they realized that this was far more dangerous than they had initially thought. The neighbors, however, didn't give up. They lowered ropes into the pit, one by one, carefully pulling each family member to safety. It felt like hours, but finally the entire family and the two neighbors were pulled out of the pit. But by that time, the damage was done. Meilan's husband and mother-in-law had died from the exposure. Their bodies had simply been overwhelmed by the toxic fumes in such a short amount of time. Meilan, her father-in-law, and the two neighbors were alive, but barely. They were rushed to the hospital, all of them in critical condition. Despite the quick response, it was clear that the loss was already irreversible. Authorities quickly arrived, investigating the situation and trying to piece together what had happened. They found that the family had only been in the pit for about 5 minutes, but that was more than enough time for the gases to do their damage. If help had arrived just a few minutes earlier, maybe, just maybe, the outcome would have been different. But the truth was that the damage was done, and nothing could bring back the lives lost. The community was left in shock, unable to comprehend how a simple act of retrieving a phone had led to such a devastating loss. Milan's uncle, overwhelmed by grief, could hardly believe what had happened. He stood in disbelief, asking over and over, "What are we supposed to do now?" His words, full of pain and confusion, echoed through the quiet town. The phone, the very object that had caused this entire tragedy, was never found. And by the time anyone had thought to search for it, it no longer mattered. The real tragedy was the lives lost, the family torn apart by a decision that, in hindsight, seemed so small. Lee Malin, now left without her husband and mother-in-law, would forever carry the weight of that moment with her. But sometimes, even the strongest bonds between people are shattered by something darker than we could ever imagine. It was September 23, 2017, at the Place Talgarth Holiday Complex near Machynlleth, Wales. Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former policewoman from Wolverhampton, had just arrived for what should have been a relaxing week-long getaway. Known as Mary to her friends and family, she was visiting the timeshare one final time before the family sold their share. Little did she know that this vacation would end in one of the most horrifying and bizarre deaths imaginable. Elizabeth was fit and active for her age. She played golf regularly, cared for her grandchildren, and worked part-time as a carer. Her life had been full and varied. She'd been a police officer, a teacher, and even worked for the post office before moving to New Zealand for a decade. Now, back in the UK, she was enjoying her golden years surrounded by family. That first night at the holiday apartment, Elizabeth went to bed without even unpacking her suitcase. In the middle of the night, she got up to use the ensuite bathroom. What happened next was a tragic sequence of events that would lead to her death. In the darkness, disoriented and naked, Elizabeth mistakenly walked into the airing cupboard instead of back to her bedroom. The door closed behind her, and when she tried to open it, the door handle broke off in her hand. She was trapped in a space barely larger than a phone booth, with no light and no way to call for help. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival that lasted nearly 2 days. Using remarkable strength and determination, Elizabeth broke off a copper pipe inside the cupboard and used it as a tool to try to break through the walls. She managed to claw through brickwork and plaster, creating a hole almost large enough to escape through. She had made a hole big enough to climb through, her son Craig later explained, but didn't realize her way out was only blocked by a picture screwed to the other side of the wall. In a cruel twist of fate, the broken pipe began spraying cold water throughout the tiny cupboard. As Elizabeth continued her frantic efforts to escape, she became soaked. With no clothes and no way to dry off, hypothermia set in quickly. The very tool she was using to try to save herself was contributing to her death. Throughout her ordeal, Elizabeth's cries for help went unheard. A couple in a neighboring apartment later reported hearing banging noises, but assumed it was maintenance work. They had decided they would report it if it continued after 5 p.m. But the sounds stopped just after 5, likely when Elizabeth became too weak to continue. For a full week, no one knew anything was wrong. It was only when maintenance staff came to investigate a water leak that they made the grim discovery. They found Elizabeth's body in the airing cupboard, her clothes and suitcase still untouched in the bedroom. The coroner ruled her death as misadventure, concluding she died of hypothermia after becoming trapped. Her son Craig was devastated, describing his mother as fit and healthy with years of a very happy life ahead of her. The tragedy prompted Craig to sue McDonald Resorts, the owners of the holiday complex, alleging negligence in maintaining the door handle. "This should never have happened," he said. "I just want the company to admit they made a mistake and make sure this cannot happen to anyone else." Elizabeth's story is a chilling reminder of how quickly an ordinary situation can turn deadly. A simple wrong turn in the night, a faulty door handle, and a series of unfortunate circumstances combined to create a nightmare scenario that ended in an unimaginable death, alone, cold, and trapped just inches away from freedom. It was 1995 in Poland, and a tragic and bizarre event occurred that left the entire country stunned. Krzysztof Asninski, a 30-year-old farmer, lost his life in a shocking attempt to prove his manliness. Krzysztof was known in his village as a strong and hardworking man. He spent most of his days tending to his farm, doing the tough physical labor that defined his life. Like many men in his community, Krzysztof enjoyed spending his evenings with friends, sharing drinks and talking about life. On one cold winter night, what began as a normal gathering among friends turned into something much darker. That evening, Krzysztof and his friends met in a small barn on his property. The group was drinking heavily, and as the night wore on, their conversation took a dangerous turn. It wasn't unusual for them to play what they called men's games, but these games were far from harmless. They were competitive, risky, and fueled by a need to prove who was the toughest among them. The night started with the men hitting each other on the head with frozen turnips. It was painful, but in their minds it was a test of strength and endurance. Laughter echoed through the barn, but underneath it there was a tension, a silent competition that no one wanted to lose. They were driven by pride, each man trying to show he could take more pain than the others. But things took a terrifying turn when one of Krzysztof's friends decided to up the stakes. He grabbed a chainsaw that had been lying around and, in a shocking move, cut off the end of his own foot. The barn fell silent as the reality of what he had done sank in. Blood poured from his wound, but instead of stopping the madness, it seemed to urge the others to do more. Krzysztof, feeling the pressure not to be outdone, made a decision that would cost him his life. In his drunken state, he believed he had to prove that he was even tougher than his friend. He took the chainsaw, looked at his friends and shouted, "Watch this then." With those words, he swung the chainsaw at his own head. The scene that followed was horrifying. The chainsaw cut through Krzysztof's neck, severing his head from his body. He died instantly, his body collapsing to the ground as his friends watched in shock and disbelief. The reality of what had just happened hit them hard. Their friend was dead, and nothing could bring him back. The news of Krzysztof Asninski's death quickly spread beyond the village. People couldn't believe the lengths he had gone to in order to prove his manhood. It wasn't long before his story was included in a study published in the British Medical Journal. This study looked at people who had died in foolish ways and found that the majority were men. The researchers suggested that men are often more willing to take unnecessary risks to prove themselves, especially when alcohol is involved. Krzysztof's death was also mentioned in connection with the Darwin Awards, a darkly humorous honor given to people who die in the most foolish ways, effectively removing themselves from the gene pool. His story stood out as one of the most extreme examples of toxic masculinity and the deadly consequences it can have. Looking back at what happened that night, it's impossible not to wonder what could have been different. What if Krzysztof and his friends hadn't been drinking so much? What if someone had stopped the games before they got out of hand? In the end, no amount of pride is worth the cost of a life. It was April 1988 at the Franklin County Sports Parachute Center in North Carolina. Ivan Lester McGuire, a 35-year-old expert skydiver with over 800 successful jumps under his belt, was gearing up for what should have been another routine day of filming student jumpers. As a skilled parachutist and videographer, he'd done this countless times before, carrying his camera equipment to capture the thrilling moments of first-time skydivers. His reputation in the skydiving community was stellar. He was known for his attention to detail and his passion for capturing the perfect shot of newcomers experiencing their first taste of freefall. On this particular day, McGuire was preparing to film a student and an instructor from the center. He was tired from previous jumps but determined to get the perfect shot. As he boarded the plane with his video equipment, something was terribly wrong, something that wouldn't become apparent until it was far too late. The plane climbed to an altitude of 10,500 feet. McGuire, focused on getting his camera equipment ready, went through his usual pre-jump routine. The student and instructor were ready, and when the moment came, they all jumped from the aircraft. The cool air rushed past them as they began their free fall, with McGuire filming the entire descent. But as they approached the moment when parachutes should be deployed, something horrifying dawned on McGuire. The camera attached to his helmet captured what would become his final moments. In a chilling revelation, he reached for his ripcord only to realize there was nothing there. In his focus on the filming equipment, he had forgotten to put on his parachute. The voice-activated camera recorded his last desperate moments. Investigators who later reviewed the footage reported hearing what sounded like, "Oh no," just after McGuire's left hand came into view, frantically searching for a parachute that wasn't there. The camera continued recording as the ground approached at 150 miles per hour, capturing McGuire's final descent. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into the incident, particularly focusing on whether pilot Mark Luman had checked if McGuire was wearing a parachute before takeoff. FAA Inspector Walter Rigsby pointed to Regulation Number 105, which clearly stated that no one may jump unless the pilot checks their parachute. But somehow, on this day, an experienced skydiver had boarded a plane without the most crucial piece of equipment. Investigators believe that McGuire's fatal mistake might have been due to fatigue or his preoccupation with the video equipment. The weight of his camera gear, similar to that of a packed parachute, might have fooled him into thinking he was properly equipped. Nancy Fayard, the wife of the parachute center's owner, later stated, "No one was aware that he got on the plane without a parachute. Of course, no one knew or they would have stopped him." The investigation ruled out suicide, concluding this was simply a tragic accident, a momentary lapse in judgment that cost McGuire his life. His body was found about 1.5 miles from the airfield he had taken off from, a grim reminder of how even the most experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. McGuire's death sent shockwaves through the skydiving community. Here was a man who had completed hundreds of successful jumps, who knew every safety protocol by heart, yet had somehow forgotten the most basic and essential piece of equipment. It was a stark reminder that no matter how routine something becomes, one moment of distraction can have devastating consequences. The incident led to significant changes in pre-jump protocols across the country. Many skydiving centers implemented mandatory equipment checklists and buddy systems, where jumpers would cross-check each other's gear before boarding. The tragedy also sparked discussions about the dangers of complacency in high-risk activities, and the importance of maintaining focus regardless of experience level. Today, Ivan McGuire's story serves as a sobering lesson in skydiving schools across the country. His death led to stricter pre-jump safety checks and a renewed emphasis on the importance of following basic safety protocols, no matter how experienced the jumper might be. In the end, McGuire's final jump became a tragic reminder that in skydiving, as in life, there are some mistakes you only get to make once. It was August 17, 2019, when Dustin Crawford's obsession with becoming a competitive eating champion led him to the most ridiculous death in Cedar Rapids County Fair history. The 27-year-old insurance claims adjuster had spent months perfecting what he believed was his ticket to fame, the Chubby Bunny Challenge. After being rejected from 3 legitimate eating contests for lack of experience, Dustin refused to abandon his dream. He discovered the county fair was hosting an unofficial marshmallow eating contest with a modest $50 prize, and saw it as his golden opportunity. For weeks, Dustin had trained religiously in his apartment, timing himself while stuffing increasingly large quantities of marshmallows into his mouth. His girlfriend had left him the previous week, calling his marshmallow obsession pathetic and embarrassing, but Dustin remained undeterred, convinced that victory at the fair would prove everyone wrong. The contest rules were simple. Participants had to stuff large marshmallows in their mouths, while clearly saying Chubby Bunny after each edition. The last person standing would claim the prize. What started as innocent county fair entertainment quickly turned into a nightmare scenario that would haunt Cedar Rapids for years. From the opening round, Dustin ignored the speech requirement entirely, cramming marshmallows into his mouth at a reckless pace that far exceeded his competitors. While others struggled to pronounce the required phrase around 3 or 4 marshmallows, Dustin was already approaching double digits. By the 8th round, he had managed to pack 23 marshmallows into his mouth and throat, creating a dangerous situation that contest officials failed to recognize. The marshmallows began absorbing his saliva and expanding, forming an increasingly dense and sticky mass that gradually blocked his airway. Despite being unable to speak or breathe properly, Dustin attempted to continue adding marshmallows to his already overloaded mouth. The sugary mass transformed into a cement-like consistency that completely sealed both his throat and nasal passages. His face began turning blue as oxygen deprivation set in. Panic struck as Dustin frantically clawed at his mouth, desperately trying to remove the compacted marshmallows. Contest officials attempted the Heimlich maneuver, but the sticky marshmallow plug had become too dense and adhesive to dislodge through conventional means. Death occurred within minutes from complete airway obstruction. When paramedics arrived, they found the final marshmallow still clutched tightly in Dustin's hand, a tragic symbol of his misguided determination to achieve competitive eating glory at any cost. The aftermath proved equally absurd. Dustin's mother filed a lawsuit against the marshmallow manufacturer, claiming their product was too sticky for safe human consumption. The fair's insurance company refused to pay any settlement, stating that death by marshmallow wasn't covered under their standard policy terms. The Cedar Rapids County Fair discontinued all eating contests following the incident, and Dustin Crawford became an unfortunate cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing fame through reckless food challenges. It was November 28, 1992, when Greg Austin Gingrich, the kind of dad who could always make you laugh, took his teenage daughter on a trip to the Grand Canyon. To anyone who knew Greg, it was no surprise. He was famous for his pranks, always playing jokes that had people rolling with laughter. His daughter loved him for it. They shared a close bond, one built on laughter, adventure, and those unforgettable moments that would make both of them smile for years. They were a team, always in sync with each other's humor. But little did they know, this trip would take a tragic turn, one that would leave their world shattered forever. The Grand Canyon, a place so majestic and vast that it leaves people speechless. Towering cliffs, deep valleys, and rock formations that stretch for miles and miles, painted in reds, oranges, and browns by the setting sun. It's a place that attracts millions of visitors every year. But for all its beauty, the Grand Canyon also has a dark side. Its dangerous edges and steep cliffs that can be a trap for those who don't respect them. Greg, though, wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about fun. And in his mind, fun meant pulling off one of his classic pranks. Standing near the edge of a guard wall with the canyon stretched out before him, Greg had a mischievous grin on his face. His daughter had seen these jokes before. She knew him well. But this time, would be different. Greg had planned it perfectly. He would pretend to lose his balance and stumble, flailing his arms wildly as if he was about to fall. The goal was to scare his daughter just for a second. Then, he'd land safely on a small slope below, springing up and laughing. "Gotcha," he'd say, making it clear it was all a joke. It would be one of those moments that would go down in family history, the kind they'd laugh about for years to come. But this time, something went horribly wrong. What Greg hadn't realized was how close the drop really was, and how far the slope was from where he stood. His idea of a harmless prank turned into a nightmare. Greg slipped. Just like that, his foot lost grip on the edge, and suddenly he was falling. His body twisted in the air as the ground below seemed to rush up to meet him. The canyon that had once felt so vast and beautiful now felt like a trap. His arms flailed, trying to grab hold of something, anything, but the force of the fall was too strong. It all happened so fast. One moment, he was there, goofing off, and the next, he was gone. His daughter, walking ahead a few steps, turned around with a smile. She was used to his jokes. She was probably waiting for him to pop up from below the ledge, laughing it off as he always did. But when she looked back and saw no sign of him, her smile quickly faded. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. She waited, thinking he was just messing around, but the seconds turned into minutes. Something was wrong. Her heart began to race. She ran back to the edge, peering down, calling his name louder, panic creeping into her voice. She couldn't see him. The canyon seemed so vast, so endless, like it had swallowed him whole. Then, the park rangers arrived. They began searching the area, combing through the rocky cliffs and the paths below. The air was thick with tension as they radioed each other, calling in reinforcements. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, in the distance, one of the rangers spotted something. Greg's body at the bottom of the canyon. The fall had been nearly 400 feet. The family was left in complete shock. His daughter, standing at the edge, couldn't believe it. One moment she had been laughing with her dad, sharing a joke. The next, he was gone. The grief and disbelief flooded over her. The world around her felt like it had shattered. The tragedy was not just the loss of Greg, but the way it all unfolded. Greg had always been careful. He knew the Grand Canyon. He'd been there before. He never imagined his own prank would be the one thing that took him down. Nature, unforgiving and powerful, doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your jokes. It simply reacts to your actions. His daughter was left with the painful memory of her father, gone in an instant. The man who had always made her laugh, the man who could do anything for her, was gone because of a simple, impulsive decision. Greg's story became a cautionary tale for many. It reminded people of the dangers of the Grand Canyon and how a simple lapse in judgment could lead to tragedy. It was a painful lesson learned too late, but one that would not be forgotten. But not all moments of tragedy happen in such dramatic ways. It was March 27, 2009 in Long Beach, California. The morning air carried that distinctive mix of salt and diesel that's familiar to anyone who spends time at sea. For Jeff Twaddle, a 54-year-old deckhand with weathered hands and a quick smile, it was just another day aboard the charter boat Gale Force. But this ordinary Friday would end in one of the most bizarre tragedies the local maritime community had ever witnessed. The Gale Force, a 55-foot vessel captained by Dan Salas, had been chartered by the Los Angeles Unified School District for an educational fishing trip. About 20 elementary school students boarded that morning, their excited voices filling the air as the boat pulled away from Rainbow Harbor. These trips were routine, a chance for city kids to experience the ocean, learn about marine life, and try their hand at fishing along the breakwater. Jeff had been working on charter boats for years. With his friendly demeanor and patient nature, he was particularly good with children. He knew how to ease their fears about handling bait, how to help them cast their lines, and most importantly, how to make them laugh. That ability to entertain was a valuable skill on a boat full of young students, some of whom had never been on the water before. As the morning progressed and the fishing began in earnest, Jeff moved about the deck, assisting students and keeping spirits high. The fish weren't biting particularly well that day, and some of the children were growing restless. That's when Jeff decided to perform a little trick, something he'd probably done before to amuse passengers. In a fateful moment that would prove catastrophically misjudged, Jeff grabbed a bait fish from the bucket and, with a playful flourish, popped it into his mouth. It was meant to be a silly gag, something to make the kids giggle and refocus their attention. But within seconds, the situation turned dire. The fish became lodged in his throat, blocking his airway completely. The children watched in confusion, then horror, as Jeff's expression changed from playful to panicked. He began to choke, his face reddening as he struggled for breath. The other crew members quickly realized something was terribly wrong and rushed to his aid. Jeff collapsed on the deck as his colleagues desperately tried to dislodge the fish from his throat. It sounds like he was trying to be lighthearted and make the students laugh when he put the fish in his mouth. Long Beach Fire Department Battalion Chief Frank Hayes would later tell reporters, his voice somber as he recounted the tragedy. Despite frantic efforts to perform CPR, Jeff remained unresponsive. The boat made an emergency return to the harbor where paramedics were waiting, but by then, precious minutes had elapsed. Jeff was rushed to St. Mary Medical Center, but doctors couldn't save him. He was pronounced dead at 1:15 p.m., less than 2 hours after his playful stunt had gone so horribly wrong. The Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed what witnesses already knew. Jeff had died from aspiration of fish, a cause of death so unusual that it made headlines across the country and even internationally. Captain Salas, visibly shaken by the loss of his crew member, told the Press-Telegram it was a tragic freak accident that had left everyone aboard the Gale Force devastated. For the elementary school students who witnessed the incident, what should have been an educational adventure became a traumatic experience. The school district immediately sent notes home to parents explaining the tragic event and offered grief counseling for the children. Jeff Twaddle's death serves as a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, how a simple joke, a moment intended to bring joy, can unexpectedly turn fatal. 1 minute he was performing for laughing children. The next he was fighting for his last breath on the deck of the boat where he had spent so many days. In the annals of bizarre and unexpected deaths, Jeff's story stands out not just for its unusual nature, but for the ordinary circumstances in which it occurred. A regular day on the water, a simple attempt to entertain, and a fatal outcome that no one could have possibly predicted. It was May 15, 2011, in Brisbane, Australia, and 20-year-old Acton Beale was returning home after a night out with friends. The internet craze of planking was sweeping social networking sites, and Acton, like many young people, had embraced the trend. Planking involved lying face down in unusual or risky places while someone took a photo to share online. The more dangerous the location, the more attention the photo would receive. That night, as Acton arrived at his apartment building, he decided to attempt a daring plank on the balcony railing of his 7th-floor unit. The railing was only 2 inches wide, making it an extremely precarious perch. His friend watched as Acton positioned himself for the stunt. As he attempted to lie down on the narrow railing, Acton suddenly lost his balance. In a horrifying moment, he plummeted 7 stories to the ground below. The fall was devastating and immediate. Emergency services rushed to the scene, and paramedics worked desperately to revive him for 20 minutes, but their efforts were in vain. Acton was pronounced dead at the scene. Deputy Police Commissioner Ross Barnett later confirmed that Acton had been drinking before the accident, which likely impaired his judgment and balance. In some circumstances, planking can be fairly harmless, Barnett explained to reporters. But once you start taking it up 7 stories, or on top of a set of traffic lights, or on a set of railway lines, or on a bridge, it's putting a person in significant danger. The news of Acton's death spread quickly, shocking both the local community and the online world. Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard even addressed the tragedy, urging people to consider safety first. Everybody likes a bit of fun, but focus has to be on keeping yourself safe first. On social media, reactions were mixed. Some expressed genuine sorrow for the loss of a young life, while others continued to post their own planking photos, seemingly undeterred by the risks. The Planking Australia Facebook page, which had about 55,000 followers before the incident, saw its membership surge to over 87,000 in the days following Acton's death. One Facebook user wrote in response to the tragedy, "One life has been lost because of this. Think of what could happen if it went wrong." But others seemed to view Acton's death as a challenge rather than a warning, with some users encouraging even more extreme planking stunts. The incident came just days after Queensland Police had charged a man for planking on a police car in Gladstone. At that time, they had issued their first warning about the dangers of the trend, particularly when performed in risky locations. Now their worst fears had been realized. Sam Weckert, the founder of the Planking Facebook group, issued a statement following Acton's death. "Planking was started as a fun and quirky pastime, and while we have no control over the actions of others, we'd like to encourage any members of the planking group and the general public to undertake this in a safe and responsible fashion." For Acton's family and friends, the tragedy was devastating. What had begun as a night out ended in an unimaginable loss. His death highlighted the dangerous influence of social media trends that encourage increasingly risky behavior for the sake of likes and attention. In the weeks that followed, authorities across Australia increased their warnings about dangerous planking, but the trend continued to spread globally. Acton Beale became known as the first victim of a social media craze that valued viral fame over personal safety. The legacy of Acton's death serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly a moment of thrill-seeking can turn fatal. As one police officer put it, "Ultimately, is it worth life in a wheelchair to take a funny photo to impress somebody you don't know on the internet?" It was September 28, 1567, in the picturesque town of Braunau am Inn, Austria. Hans Steininger was no ordinary man. He was the town's burgomaster, what we'd call a mayor today, and he had been elected to this position 6 times in a row. But what made Hans truly remarkable wasn't his political career, it was his beard. This wasn't just any beard. It was an extraordinary 4.5-foot-long masterpiece that had become his trademark. On a typical day, Hans would carefully roll up his massive beard and tuck it safely into his pocket before going about his business. He was well loved by the townspeople, known for his leadership and, of course, that magnificent facial hair that trailed behind him when unleashed. But on this particular evening, a series of events would unfold that would turn his pride and joy into an instrument of death. The trouble began when a fire broke out in the town. As the burgomaster, Hans felt duty-bound to help coordinate the emergency response. In his haste to assist his fellow townspeople, he made a fatal mistake. He forgot to roll up and secure his beard. As panic spread through the streets and smoke filled the air, Hans rushed to help, but fate had other plans. As he hurried down a flight of stairs, something went terribly wrong. His own foot landed on his trailing beard, and in an instant the pride of Braunau am Inn became his downfall. Literally, Hans tumbled down the stairs, and in the process his neck snapped. The man who had led the town through 6 terms as burgomaster was killed by his own facial hair. The town was shocked by the bizarre nature of their beloved leader's death. But Hans Steininger's story didn't end there. Before his burial, his famous beard was carefully cut off and preserved. It became a treasured artifact, passed down through generations of his family like some sort of peculiar heirloom. Can you imagine growing up and having your father hand you a 4-foot-long disembodied beard saying, "Son, this is yours now. Take good care of it"? Eventually, in 1919, someone in the family finally decided enough was enough and donated the beard to the town. Today, more than 450 years after Hans Steininger's death, you can still see his legendary beard on display at the District Museum Herzogsburg in Braunau. The town also honors his memory with a large stone relief carving on the site of St. Stephen's Church, showing Hans with his infamous beard flowing down past his feet. The story of Hans Steininger serves as a bizarre reminder of how the very thing that makes us famous can sometimes be our undoing. His death might seem almost comical today, but it's also a testament to how even the most mundane things, like forgetting to tuck away your beard, can have fatal consequences. In Braunau am Inn, they've chosen to celebrate this unusual piece of their history, even offering tours led by Steininger reenactors wearing flowing fake beards, though presumably they're careful on the stairs. Today, visitors to Braunau can still see both the stone relief of Hans and his preserved beard, reminders of the man who quite literally died for his facial hair. It's probably the only case in history where a beard turned from fashion statement to murder weapon, making Hans Steininger's death one of the most bizarre endings in human history. It was March 3, 2020, when Derek Williams's explosive temper finally met its match at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas campus. Derek had always been a powder keg waiting to explode. Growing up with a father who constantly berated him for being weak and drilled into him that real men never back down, Derek developed an uncontrollable rage that followed him everywhere. His fraternity brothers knew to give him space when things didn't go his way, and campus dining staff had learned this lesson the hard way. Derek was banned from 3 dining halls for his aggressive outbursts over the smallest inconveniences. That fateful night, Derek was down to his last $5, desperately needing food before a crucial exam. The vending machine outside the library seemed like his salvation, but it quickly became his nemesis. The machine swallowed his money on the first attempt, leaving him empty-handed and furious. His roommate offered to lend him cash, but Derek's pride wouldn't allow him to accept help. Real men solve their own problems. When the machine ate his money a second time, Derek's fist connected with the glass, creating spiderweb cracks across the surface. By the third theft, something inside Derek snapped completely. The 900-pound vending machine became the target of 12 minutes of pure, unhinged fury. Derek began violently shaking the massive machine, his muscles straining against its weight. When that failed to dislodge his snacks, he started ramming his shoulder into it repeatedly, each impact causing the machine to rock dangerously on its base. The rational part of his mind had completely shut down. There was only rage and the need to win this battle. Spotting a nearby bench, Derek climbed up to gain better leverage. From this elevated position, he grabbed the top of the machine and began pulling it toward himself with all his strength. The machine tilted at a precarious 30-degree angle, teetering on the edge of disaster. But Derek couldn't see past his anger to recognize the mortal danger he had created. Physics took over where Derek's judgment had failed. The massive machine reached its tipping point and began crashing forward. Derek tried to jump clear, but his foot caught on the bench, sending him tumbling backward just as 900 pounds of metal and machinery came crushing down. The impact was devastating. The machine's full weight landed squarely on Derek's chest, instantly shattering his rib cage. Multiple ribs punctured both lungs, causing immediate collapse and internal bleeding. His sternum exploded into fragments that tore into his heart. Within 4 minutes, Derek Williams was dead, crushed by his own uncontrollable rage and a vending machine that simply wouldn't give him his snacks. Security cameras captured every moment of Derek's final tantrum. When emergency responders arrived 8 minutes after a horrified student called 911, they found Derek's lifeless body pinned beneath the machine that had finally won their battle. The $5 that started it all lay scattered on the floor, worthless now that Derek would never need food again. In the end, Derek's father's lessons about never backing down had led his son to a fight he couldn't win against an opponent that felt no pain, showed no mercy, and weighed 900 pounds.